We talk about Jesus and reading biblical violence, including things like the Canaanite genocide. And Jesus came to fulfill the law, Matthew 5:17, which includes challenging received interpretations of the law. For example, one of the fundamental aspects of the law is the distinction between clean and unclean foods. Pious Jews believe the dietary laws to be so essential that in 2nd Maccabees 7, we read of 7 young men, all brothers, who submitted to having their tongues cut out, their limbs cut off, and to being skinned alive rather than to be forced to eat pork in violation of the law. And then in Mark 7:19, Jesus declares all foods clean. The fulfillment of the law brings with it a radical challenge to past understanding and practice. And so it is with biblical violence. When the Torah teaches an eye for an eye, Exodus 21 or Deuteronomy 19, uh, in contrast, Matthew 5:38 to 48, Jesus calls us to turn the other cheek, a teaching later echoed by Paul in Romans 12:14. While the imprecatory psalmist calls for the hatred of enemies, Jesus calls us to love our enemies and to pray for those who persecute us. When Peter, in a bold attempt to be magnanimous, proposes forgiving enemies even up to 7 times in Matthew 18, Jesus responds by upping the bar. No, he says 77 times. Point, of course, is not that you keep score until you hit 77. Point is that you don't stop forgiving. As Grant Osborne points out, Jesus is probably alluding to Genesis 4:24, where Lamech infamously boasts of his 70-fold vengeful spirit, in which he will seek vengeance on all those who offend against him. Osborne observes, quote, Lamech celebrated vengeance. Jesus abrogates it altogether. In John 8, a woman is caught in adultery and brought to Jesus. According to Torah, she should be stoned to death, period. But Jesus says, let he who is without sin throw the first stone. In Luke 9, when Jesus is rejected by Samaritans, James and John ask if they should go down and call down fire from heaven to judge those rebellious wretches. But no, Jesus rebukes them and they continue on their way. And when Jesus' followers suggest violence to defend him, Jesus rebukes them in Luke 22:49 to 51 and John 18:11. His entire life is cruciform, embodied by a commitment to peace, to service, and a call that extends to his followers. We too are called to take up our cross daily and follow him, Luke 9:23, and to empty ourselves as he did, as we read in Philippians 2. Now, what about the Canaanites? In Matthew 15:21 to 28, Jesus has an encounter with a Canaanite woman, and she has the temerity to ask him to help her with her demon-possessed daughter. As Bruner writes, quote, readers of the Hebrew scriptures, the adjective Canaanite means everything dangerous to the faith of Israel. At first blush, Jesus seems to affirm this view as he refers to her and her daughter as dogs, a slur that is just dehumanizing as dehumanizing and insulting in the first century as it would be today when Donald Trump refers to his enemies as dogs. But then something truly extraordinary happens. The woman is undeterred by this shocking rebuff, this dehumanizing, objectifying language. And instead, she offers the perfect response by saying, even dogs receive crumbs from the master's table. Unless one think that by offering that quick-witted reply, she had shown up the master, Jesus' response is equally surprising. He showed clear delight at her response. And that response of Jesus reveals the truth. He was not actually intending to call her a dog, he was not really uh, affirming the dehumanizing, objectifying attitudes of those around him, attitudes which allowed for the original recorded slaughter of the Canaanites in the book of Joshua. Instead, she has risen to the challenge, as he knew she would. R.T. France writes this: in refusing to accept the traditional Jewish exclusion of Gentiles from the grace of God, he has shown a true prophetic grasp of the new perspective of the kingdom of heaven. So when you read about biblical violence in the book of Joshua, be prepared to read it through the eyes and the lens and the perspective of Jesus. He who has said, others have said, hate your enemies, but I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.